Oren, a motivated student from the crystalline planet of Zerath, suggested a research on human pain tolerance during the third month of the Galactic Academy's Interspecies Cultural Exchange Program. Students in the lecture hall responded to the proposal with a combination of curiosity and slight trepidation. The Academy's alien populace was fascinated by and terrified of humans because of their infamous fortitude and tenacity. Under strict oversight, the plan was accepted, and a group headed by Oren was given charge of the study. They chose Gregor Langston, a male, to be their human participant. Gregor was a modest man, tall but not intimidating, with a calm manner that often belied his keen sense of humor. His desire to learn about alien civilizations and make a positive impression on behalf of Earth had led him to volunteer for the program out of pure curiosity. Gregor was hesitant when asked to participate in the study. The term pain made him pause, but he finally accepted, figuring that he had experienced enough hardship in his life to be able to handle any challenge. Gregor and the study team met for the first time in a spotless white lab with devices that were buzzing gently. Oren embraced Gregor with unbridled delight, her dazzling figure reflecting light in captivating ways. Oren remarked, "We have heard stories of your species' perseverance," with a hum of melody in their voice. "We want to know the boundaries of your capacity to withstand unspeakable physical suffering without dying." Gregor's eyebrows went up. He looked at the crew and said, "Tails, huh? Well, I don't know about Tails, but we've got some pretty tough guys back home." His voice was laced with interest. "What specifically are you thinking of?" The group described the criteria, which included a number of carefully monitored, non-fatal tests intended to gauge participants' pain thresholds in response to various emotional, pharmacological, and physical stimuli. Gregor was given the assurance that he might leave at any moment, and safety precautions were stressed. He gave a contemplative nod, his interest surpassing any worries. The first experiment, which included minor physical shocks, was quite straightforward. The scientists started by using a robotic arm to apply light pinches. Gregor did not flinch, and Oren and the others stared in curiosity. The pinches increased in severity until the mechanism produced what most creatures would have found agonizing. Gregor grimaced but kept his cool. His voice was dry as he inquired, "Are we done with the warm-up?" Oren and their co-workers looked at each other, their bioluminescence fading in mutual awe. Exposure to intense cold and heat followed. In order to prevent irreversible damage, Gregor's hand was put on a surface that cycled between freezing temperatures and intense heat. Gregor's jaw tightened slightly, but he kept his hand there, where most animals would have shied away. He said, "It feels worse than ice fishing in Minnesota." Their eyebrows knitted together in anxiety as the aliens made feverish notes. As they discussed whether the human nervous system was only unmatched in strength or merely primitive, murmurs went through the gathering. The group's physician, a gelatinous creature named XYL, muttered, "Are you sure this is ethical?" Uncomfortably, their transparent blue body trembled. "He seems to be in pain." Gregor laughed when he heard. "Believe me, I have experienced worse. Continue on." The experiments became more intense. In addition to being evaluated for his sensitivity to irritants on his skin, Gregor was given moderate electric shocks and even put through sensory overload with visual and oral stimulation. He bore it all with a combination of cynical humor and stoicism. The fissures did not show up until the emotional pain tests. The group recreated situations intended to arouse emotions of dread, rejection, or loss using holographic simulations. As Gregor observed the projections, his breathing stayed steady, but his gaze sharpened. Oren's body throbbed with real anxiety as they inquired, "Do you want to speak about what you are feeling?" Gregor gave a head shake. "You may go on to the next one. It is only memories." The extraterrestrial crew was both amazed and uneasy at the conclusion of the first round of trials. Gregor was given time to recover when Oren announced a recess, and the squad reconvened in the break room. Oren went up to XYL. "Are you certain he is not hurt?" XYL gave a gurgle of nervousness. "Emotionally, I cannot understand how he keeps such calm. It is as if his species has evolved to tolerate agony as a way of life. Physically, yes, but emotionally." Oren's light wavered uncomfortably. "We could be pushing him too far, I worry." In the meanwhile, Gregor stretched and rubbed his shoulders in his designated space. Despite the exhausting nature of the studies, he was strangely entertained by the aliens' responses. They seemed to be more upset by his suffering than he was. Oren spoke to XYL about their worries over the vacation. "Emotionally, I am concerned about the effect on him, but physically, he is whole. It is as if people have evolved the capacity to withstand adversity." Oren twitched uneasily. "I worry that we may be asking too much of him." Gregor, meantime, was in his quarters, rubbing and stretching his aching muscles. Even though he was exhausted, he found some amusement in the aliens' responses. They seemed to be more disturbed by his suffering than he was. The tension increased as the second round of testing began. Cuts and bruises administered using sophisticated holography that replicated the feelings without really causing injury were part of the physical testing this time. Gregor's responses were calm and calculated. He gritted his teeth without yelling. The extraterrestrial onlookers were starting to look tired. With their gelatinous shape trembling in agony, XYL often excused themselves to the corner. Most of the time, Oren's hues faded. The last experiment of the second round, which simulated a car crash, was the decisive moment. Sitting in a reinforced pod, Gregor experienced the commotion and intensity of a crash. He came out, damaged but standing, as the pod opened. He said, "Well, that was quite the journey," as he brushed his clothing aside. Oren looked on incredulously. "How are you still able to function?" Gregor gave a little grin. "My species is characterized by stubbornness." By the third stage, the research team was failing rather than Gregor. XYL's body was drained and deflated, and they refused to continue to participate. In sharp contrast to their typical brightness, Oren's luminosity had dropped substantially, yet they continued. Chemical stimuli, such as headaches, nausea, and muscular pains, were used in the last round of trials to mimic internal discomfort. Gregor handled each with almost indifference, his sardonic humor unaltered. After everything was finished, the group gathered in the observation room to talk about what they had discovered. There was a tinge of sorrow in Oren's voice. "This cannot be normal. We have learned a lot about human pain tolerance, but at what cost?" Still massaging his temples from the mock migraine, Gregor joined them. "It is not normal, you are correct, but life is not nice. Humans adapt, we persevere and live, it is simply who we are." As they processed the meaning of what he had spoken, the room grew quiet. The aliens realized for the first time the extent of human tenacity and the price it cost. When XYL did speak, their voice was shaky. "It is scary, your species." Gregor gave a hearty chuckle. "We often get that." In a state of both wonder and trepidation, the study team reconvened the next morning. An unexpected symptom of stress was the mild flickering of Oren's physique. XYL's shape drooped like a withered plant, and they were still clearly deflated. None could dispute the need to continue for scientific reasons, no matter how exhausted they were. The discoveries on human psychology and physiology were too important to ignore. Gregor was as calm as if he were going into a friendly meeting instead of more exams, and he arrived on time with a hot cup of what smelt strangely like coffee. He said, "Good morning," with a smile. "What is planned for today?" "More suffering, I suppose." Oren paused, discomfort blazing over their glistening surface. "We can change the settings if needed, but we have planned the next step." Gregor's eyebrows went up. You believe I am going to tap out? Why? No, Oren acknowledged, but some of us think the exams are too much. Gregor gave a quiet laugh. Let us continue. I can take it. You people truly are not accustomed to humans, are you? Psychological resilience was the main topic of the third phase. In situations intended to test emotional endurance, the aliens had been especially interested in how humans dealt with extended stress and mental suffering. The crew was startled by Gregor's self-assurance in volunteering for these experiments. To them, he seemed either very brave or incredibly ignorant of what lay ahead. Isolation was used in the first test. Gregor spent hours floating in a completely quiet, dark tank in a sensory deprivation chamber. The aliens kept an eye on his vitals, anticipating that without sensory stimulation, his mind would disintegrate. Rather, Gregor came out looking renewed. Do you guys offer this as a spa service? Honestly, he replied, wiping the saline solution from his skin. That was one of the most calming sensations I have had in months. Oren's light faded much further. Such seclusion would result in severe confusion, if not complete psychological breakdown, for the majority of animals. Gregor smiled back, yeah, but I am not most species. A little peace and quiet is sort of pleasant for a change. Humans are accustomed to coping with pandemonium. The following exam was a mock social rejection exercise. In order to replicate real-world situations, holographic representations of friends, family, and co-workers gave scathing critiques and rejections. With a stern countenance and controlled, calm body language, Gregor listened. Oren came carefully as the simulation came to a close. They inquired, "Are you all right?" Gregor gave a nod. Sticks and stones, you know, but these situations were intended to elicit severe emotional discomfort. Oh, I am okay. Gregor gave a shrug. You learn to shrug it off. Life's too short to concentrate on what others think of you. I have had my share of uncomfortable chats. The aliens were clearly becoming uncomfortable. XYL, who had at first attempted to stay out of the situation, was unable to control their worry any longer. During a pause, they walked toward Gregor, their gelatinous bodies quivering a little. Human, they said tentatively, does this not bother you, to put up with such things without being affected? It seems strange. Gregor's face became softer. We all have different coping mechanisms, mine is to keep going on. It is not that it does not bother me, I simply do not let it overwhelm me. Silently, XYL absorbed this, their shape rippled like a pebble in a pond. In addition to being perplexing, Gregor's tenacity was subtly disturbing. A simulated hostage situation served as the last psychological test. Gregor was put in a virtual world where he was under tremendous pressure to make morally challenging decisions. He was forced to balance the worth of individual lives against the larger good as a result of the holograms showing defenseless bystanders in danger. As he moved grimly and determinedly through the scenarios, the crew stared in apprehension. Gregor tightened his teeth and sat quietly for a time after the simulation was over. Oren paused, then stepped forward. They remarked, that was challenging, with caution. Are you certain you want to continue? You did a great job, but your stress signs were substantial. Gregor's shoulders relaxed as he let out a deep breath. That was difficult, he acknowledged, but I am all good. You people have more exams coming up, have not you? Oren's hues became dimmer. But? Then let's get to it, interrupts Gregor in a forceful voice. I want to finish this if I am going to do it. Long-term endurance was the subject of the study's fourth and last phase. The aliens wanted to know how humans managed physical hardship and accumulated stress over time. Gregor faced a constant barrage of difficulties, such as lack of sleep, physical strain, and uncomfortable surroundings. He initially succeeded by maintaining his customary composure and making jokes with the crew during breaks. His sense of humor served as an odd diversion from the demanding nature of the examinations. But even Gregor's fortitude started to falter as the hours turned into days. He walked more slowly, his answers less incisive, the darkening of the rings beneath his eyes, and the hint of weariness in his voice. They were tense aliens. Specifically, Oren had developed a strong bond with their human subject. Their light flickered with anxiety as they checked on him often. One evening, as Gregor sat slouched in a chair, massaging his temples, Oren murmured, "You do not have to continue. No one would think worse of you for stopping. We have more than enough data." Gregor raised his head, his face solemn. "Thank you, Oren, but I do not want to leave this half-finished. This is not just about the facts. I joined up to demonstrate what people are capable of." XYL, who had been hiding close by, was unable to contain himself any longer. "But at what cost? You are pushing yourself over your limit. Your body and mind are not invincible." Gregor gave a little grin. "That is more or less the idea. Humans are not invincible, yet we persevere because that is what defines us." The aliens became quiet, seeming uncomfortable. Despite their sophisticated technology and expertise, they were unable to fully appreciate the strength of human will. They saw Gregor's endurance as almost pathological, a perilous fusion of pride and tenacity. Gregor stumbled out of the simulation room as the last test came to an end, his body clearly trembling with fatigue. He fell into a chair, and Oren and XYL ran to his side to comfort him. Oren said, "It is done," their brightness subdued. "You have shown more than we could have ever imagined." Gregor forced a weary grin. "All right, may I have some coffee now?" With much hoopla, the findings of the investigation were delivered to the Galactic Academy. Although the study team's presentation was tinged with uneasiness, the results were revolutionary, providing previously unheard-of insights into human physiology and psychology. They emphasized the remarkable toll it had on Gregor and spoke of his tenacity with both awe and fear. The extraterrestrial pupils, who had been so keen to learn about human pain tolerance at first, left feeling scared and pallid. Deeply unnerved by the tremendous strength of human determination to persevere, they viewed humans with a new kind of reverence and caution. Gregor, on the other hand, came back to Earth with a fresh respect for the standing of his race. As a memento of the connection they had made, forged in the furnace of their common experiences, he carried a little gift from Oren, a shining crystal that pulsed gently with light. "I hope I didn't frighten them off too much," he remarked, grinning wryly as he told his companions the incident. "But at least they will reconsider underestimating a human being." The study's ramifications spread among the larger student population after the presentation at the Galactic Academy. The rest of the academy was buzzing with a mixture of wonder and apprehension as the research team struggled to process what they had seen. Like wildfire, rumors had been circulating about Gregor. Among the interspecies pupils, he became a reluctant celebrity due to rumors about his supposedly unbreakable stamina and stoic manner. Meanwhile, Gregor was conflicted about his sudden celebrity. Although he valued the respect, he did not especially like the ongoing looks or the occasional inquisitive queries from students who want to analyze his mental state outside of the lab. Although he had thought that the test's outcome would signal the end of his fame, it seemed to have increased it. The biggest obstacle was when other extraterrestrial experts asked him to do follow-up study. The wiry insectoid with many eyes, Thrix, said, "We assure you that these tests are entirely observational." As they talked, their voice clicked, expressing a mixture of enthusiasm and reverence. "We want to do comparison research between humans and other species, completely harmless, of course, because we have heard about your tenacity." Gregor rubbed his temples and moaned. "I appreciate your attention, but I have had enough tests to last a lifetime. Look, I get that you are all inquisitive, but I did not sign up to be a perpetual lab rat. Thrix paused, lowering their antennae. Your contributions to interspecies understanding may be unmatched, but we understand. Gregor smiled slightly, strainedly. I guess I have done my share for now. Maybe next time. Oren and the other members of the first research team, meantime, were having a hard time dealing with the fallout from their investigation. The emotional toll their discoveries had taken on them persisted even after they were lauded. In particular, Oren found themselves mentally reliving the events of Gregor's trials and doubting the morality of their job. Oren confided in XYL when they were alone in the academy grounds. Do you believe we overreached ourselves? Thoughtful ripples came from XYL, whose shape had returned to some of its former vitality. I still do not understand how he withstood so much, and I have played those tests over and over in my head. But more than that, I cannot get rid of the sensation that we just witnessed the beginning of what humans are capable of. The crystalline surface of Oren became dimmer. That is the thing that worries me. If this is what they are willing to put up with, what does it say about the struggles their species suffers on a regular basis or the extent they may go to in genuinely grave situations? The gelatinous body of XYL trembled. Perhaps it is preferable to avoid thinking too much about such topics. Gregor was reluctant at first, but he finally consented to go to an Academy-sponsored panel discussion. Gregor was the honored guest, and the purpose of the gathering was to examine the wider ramifications of human perseverance. Feeling quite uncomfortable, he sat on a stage with students, diplomats, and scientists from hundreds of different species. The moderators began the conversation by summarizing the main conclusions of the research. However, the tone changed when questions were asked throughout the session. While some audience members were appreciative, others were worried about the possible risks of such a resilient species. A tall reptile called Draffel questioned, "How can your species preserve social cohesiveness when people are capable of enduring so much? Would not such endurance lead to irresponsibility or indifference for others' suffering?" With deliberate word choice, Gregor leaned forward. Humans can suffer a lot, but that does not imply we do not care about pain, whether it is our own or that of others. In fact, I would suggest the opposite. Our capacity to endure stems from our awareness of how painful it is and our desire to shield others from it. It teaches us empathy rather than just toughness. There were skeptic clicks and murmurs of approbation in reaction to the answer. Vrox, a pod-like creature who was another pupil, held out a tentacle. But does not this flexibility make your species dangerous? What limits your hostility if you can withstand anything? With a sigh, Gregor's face became grave. We have learned that creating suffering does not solve issues, it merely produces more, and most of us want to create a better society rather than destroy it. I will not lie, people have done some pretty horrible things to one another. But resilience is not just about surviving pain, it is about learning from it. His remarks weighed heavily on the audience, and the room became quiet. Even the doubters seemed to change their minds. A surprisingly large number of students and staff members contacted Gregor in the days that followed, wanting to thank him or, in some instances, apologize for their earlier mistrust. Though the continual attention made him miss the relative obscurity of Earth, he handled every encounter with his usual blend of humility and good humor. He came into Oren and XYL one day while walking through the Academy's Arboretum. Even before they talked, the two researchers' uneasiness was apparent as they waited for him. "We have been thinking about the research, and we wanted to say, we are sorry if we pushed you too far," Oren said tentatively, their radiance a faint sheen. Gregor paused his stroll to examine their faces. "I decided to do this, you did not force me to do it, but thank you for the apologies." XYL gave a nervous ripple. "Now that we know what we were asking of you, your willingness to put up with it is even more amazing and unnerving." Gregor gave a little grin. "That is one way to describe it, unsettling." There was a hint of hesitant relief as Oren's radiance intensified. "We hope you will think of us as more than simply researchers, but as collaborators." Gregor grinned broadly. "You are nice people, and I would even call you friends, even if you may have put me through a lot." The two aliens looked at one another, their bodies gleaming and rippling in ways that expressed thankfulness and amazement. Despite their disagreements, they had grown to respect and appreciate Gregor for his quiet strength of character as well as his tenacity. Though Gregor's influence persisted in the shape of a renewed regard for mankind, life at the Academy eventually returned to normal. Everyone engaged had been impacted by the research, which changed their perspectives and promoted a better comprehension of human nature. It was an interesting and humble experience for Gregor. The aliens had ultimately discovered more about him, and, therefore, about humanity, than he had, despite his expectation that he would study about foreign civilizations at the school. Gregor stood on the observation deck, staring at the sky as he got ready to go back to Earth. He was joined by Oren and XYL, whose presence served as a reassuring reminder of the bonds he had made. "You know," Gregor murmured, breaking the stillness, "I would not swap this experience for anything, despite all the agony and strangeness." Oren became more radiant. "Neither would we." XYL gave a nod of assent. "You have taught us more than we ever imagined, about humanity, hope, and resilience." Gregor gave a quiet laugh. "Well, you will see that we are not all that different if you ever get to Earth. We are just a bit tougher than we appear." Gregor found himself considering how much the experience had changed his perspective on people and the larger cosmos as he was ready to leave the Galactic Academy. For Gregor as much as the aliens who studied him, the school, with its vast halls teeming with creatures of every conceivable shape, had been a furnace of revelation. But he was itching to go back to Earth, where the only ways to test for pain were by biting into a hot pizza or stubbing a toe. There was an odd blend of seriousness and jubilation on the day of his goodbye. To commemorate him, the Academy threw a modest party, and representatives of many species presented gifts of gratitude. Naturally, Oren and XYL were in the lead, their anxious demeanor revealing their unwillingness to part ways. "This crystal is a mark of friendship on Zerath," Oren said, giving him a tiny, faintly glowing shard. "It is not normal to offer it to individuals outside our race, but we think you have earned it." XYL held out a glistening blue liquid bottle. "This is a healing potion from my planet. It will not improve your physical condition, but it is a token of appreciation. Maybe you can use it as a talking point when you go home." Gregor grinned as he took the presents. "Thanks, both of you. Do not worry, I will not forget you. You do not get to be the interstellar poster child for pain tolerance every day." The audience chuckled, but there was also appreciation in the comedy. A monument to the unexpected intricacy of a species that some at the Academy had first written off as primitive, Gregor had come to represent human tenacity. Gregor saw the Academy fade into the distance as the transfer ship took off. He had spent months living in the shining building on an asteroid circling a far-off star. He now experienced a twinge of bittersweet feeling as it vanished from view. During his stay there, he had acquired a fresh viewpoint in addition to information. Initially, the return trip to Earth went well, allowing Gregor to relax. But when the spacecraft got closer to Sol, alarms went out due to an unforeseen breakdown. The lights flashed menacingly, and the ship's main thrusters sputtered. The extraterrestrial pilot, a stoic amphibian called Rios, looked at Gregor, who was already securely fastened in his seat, with a tired expression. With his hands on the armrests, Gregor questioned, "This isn't regular practice, right?" "No," said Rios coolly. "Our thrusters seem to have been hacked. Emergency procedures are being followed." The spacecraft started to descend slowly and deliberately in the direction of an uninhabited moon that orbited Jupiter. The passengers were shocked but uninjured by the difficult but manageable landing. Gregor went outdoors to see the bleak cold scenery as the staff hurried to evaluate the damage. Muttering to himself, well, this wasn't in the agenda. With their gills flashing in excitement, Rios joined him. We have adequate supplies, but it would be wise to set up a perimeter in case of unforeseen difficulties. Repairs will take time. Gregor nodded as his practical side came into play. Tell me how I may be of assistance. Gregor's human flexibility proved important throughout the course of the next several days. Gregor was in charge of keeping the area secure and morale up while the alien crew worked on fixing the thrusters. Even the most doubtful crew members were amazed by his ability to remain composed under duress. Once, during a pause, Rios came up to him. They said, "You manage tension quite well," as their amphibious eyes narrowed in interest. Do all people have this amount of poise? Leaning against a makeshift barrier, Gregor laughed. Not all of us, but after experiencing enough difficult circumstances, you learn to maintain composure. Panic does not solve anything. Rios gave him a contemplative look. Your species is confusing. It is delicate and unforgiving at the same time. I do not completely grasp that mix. Welcome to the club, said Gregor, grinning. Throughout the 4 days of the lunar experience, Gregor's initiative and resourcefulness were essential. The crew insisted on having a little feast to celebrate their survival when the ship was eventually repaired. Weary but content, Gregor accepted their appreciation with his usual humor and humility. Gregor found himself thinking again about the peculiar interaction between strength and fragility that characterized humans as the spacecraft continued its journey to Earth. Leaning on the same obstinate perseverance that had perplexed and amazed his extraterrestrial friends, he had passed the Academy's exams, negotiated cultural misunderstandings, and now weathered an emergency landing. Gregor was relieved to set foot on familiar ground when the spacecraft eventually landed on Earth. After months of interstellar intrigue, the beautiful sky, the fresh air, and the distant hum of traffic all seemed blissfully ordinary. He was welcomed by a small group of Earth's diplomatic corps, who were interested in learning about his adventures. With a blend of openness and humor, Gregor told his tales, downplaying his personal part while highlighting the value of interspecies cooperation. A representative leaned over to ask, in the pain tolerance study, what was it like? Gregor grinned. Let us simply say that it opened everyone's eyes. Although Gregor's routine resumed in the next weeks, life was everything but typical. He had become a small celebrity once word of his experience at the Academy reached Earth. He received offers of a book contract, interviews for films, and conference speaking engagements. Gregor stayed anchored through it all. He was more concerned with sharing what he had discovered about empathy, resiliency, and the need of understanding others, whether they were foreign or not, than he was with fame or glory. He reflected about Oren, XYL, and all the other people who had influenced his path as he stood one evening on the balcony of his apartment, gazing out at the city lights. Although he was unsure whether he would ever see them again, he was certain that the relationships they had created would last. He smiled softly and said to himself, humans, we may be rough, but we are not that horrible. In a toast to the cosmos and all of its potential, Gregor then lifted his coffee cup to the skies.